What is up, guys? Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a really nice container setup for your crayfish. So let's talk about the ups and downs of a crayfish container. The positives for a crayfish container is that crayfish containers are cheaper to make, are more space efficient, and are easier to work with and customize. So there's obviously some negatives that also comes with crayfish containers, and that is that containers have smaller water volume. Though, as I mentioned later in this video, that a container may have the same surface area or walking space of a standard 10-gallon, the water volume is much smaller. That means water parameters are harder to control, and I recommend having some tank experience before starting your own crayfish container. So for this container setup, I will be using one of the Container Store rectangular containers. You can get them at the Container Store for like $2.50, tax included. Also, to the right is a pinker container. This is a larger container that you could use to fit a crayfish throughout its whole life. Smaller container I will be used to growing out juveniles, but the larger container is something that you could keep a crayfish in, and for its entire life. But you might need to get a bigger one when it gets older. Now, I also have a drill and airline tubing and a sponge filter, and the sponge filter is what will be filtering this container, and the drill will be used to drill holes in the lid of the container. Now, what I'm not showing here is the air pump that we use to run the sponge filter. I actually have an air pump going right now, and I am going to use a connector and connect this container to my currently run sponge filter, but that will run you about $10. I'm currently using a Tetra sponge filter, just Tetra air pump, just for a 10-gallon. It should work fine. So now another important thing is choosing your materials. Now, as you can see, when you choose your plastic, you want to be choosing a safe plastic. Most containers have the number 5 around the recycling thing, and that's PP. I don't know what that stands for, but that is a safe plastic. As you can see, the recycling number is 5. A lot of containers that I have are made out of this plastic, and it's safe, but there are other plastics that are safe, but most of them are made out of 5, and that's pretty safe. Anything food grade is going to be safe too. And also the larger container is also has a recycling number of 5, so this is pretty aquarium safe. Then for tubing and sponge filters, I recommend using the sponge filters that have a suction cup. Those are able to adapt more nicely to a container and acts as a hiding place for your crayfish. And also 4mm air pump, that's important. 4mm tubing, just to make sure your air pump is aligned. And also don't forget the things you need for tubing: air check valves, any kind of power control valve. Those kind of things are also important and pretty cheap, so get those. And now for the sponge filter, like I said, I already talked about this, so let's get on into building. So first things first is we want to get a hole drilled into the lid so that way airway tubing can go in. If you're worried about the lid not ventilating, this pump is pumping oxygen straight into the water, so don't worry about any kind of ventilation or anything. This pump is doing already a lot. And you are going to have to use a drill for this, so if you don't know how to use a drill, or if you're a young child, just make sure you have a trusted adult with you, and don't hurt yourself, just be smart. Now, because I haven't made a container in a while, I forgot the exact kind of drilling you need, the exact size of the drill bit, so this will take some trial and error. And I recommend you start smaller because you can make a hole bigger, but you cannot make a hole smaller. So as you can see, this hole I drilled was too small, so that means I needed a bigger drill bit in order to fit the airline tubing in. So a reason why I like these container store containers is because their lids are super easy to drill through and they're super malleable and you can cut through them. It's super great. But anyways, I got the bigger drill bit, and this was the 1/4 size. It fit perfectly through the airline tubing. And now we can move on to step 2, which is connecting your tubing to the air pump. So this is my Tetra Whisper air pump, and this is the new redirector I got that kind of hangs onto the back of this tank, and that way I can use that one air pump to pump 2 containers. So now let me just plug in my new tube and start to adjust the airflow so that way both containers are balanced. So now it's time to actually get the container itself set up and ready to house a crayfish. Now in this video, don't put down a substrate, but I'd highly recommend putting down a substrate, and I will later in this, after the video, I do end up putting down a substrate for this. I'd recommend it. It helps your crayfish more and it holds more bacteria, which is good. Now it's time to connect the tubing through the lid. I advise you go through the lid first, and that way your airline tubing will be connected to the sponge. So first connect tubing to the sponge and then put the lid on, and that way you can connect other things like airline or air check valves, that kind of stuff. Okay, so now because I'm connecting 2 containers into one air pump, I'm adjusting the airflow so both containers are right. Well, once you get the airflow set up correctly, just fill it up with dechlorinated water. My sponge filter that I'm using is already preloaded with bacteria from a mature aquarium, but make sure your tank or container is cycled. There's a lot of videos on tank cycling out there. I'm not going to explain it to you, but yeah, so this is the container, and I'll show you some pics of how it is now. So yeah, this is how I created my crayfish container. Containers are really cheap, really space efficient, but just make sure you know what you're doing and how to control water parameters beforehand. So this is Crayfish Obsession, and I'll see you in the next one. Sorry, I haven't really uploaded a lot. I've been busy, but I will get some cool videos out there soon.